My name is Jesse Blumenthal. I'm an artist and educator from Missoula, Montana, and we are at the Holter Museum in the Endemic installation. This is a multimedia installation which speaks to a certain place and time, hence the name Endemic. And this particular installation is looking to investigate the Intermountain West in our transition from an extraction economy to a more tourism-based economy. The extraction to tourism transition is something that we're experiencing right now as we grapple with the impacts of extractive industries on our landscape and look at ways that we can continue to be a sustainable community while still honoring the landscapes and architecture that surround us. There's a bit of a transitionary period right now where we're trying to figure out how to best do that. And in the meantime, the architecture and the landscape still reflects the extractive history that we've had. While we try to draw in a tourism population to view that, I find that that's an interesting place to be in. So some of these structures have become defunct, some of them are quite active, and all of them have a history that speaks to our usage of this landscape. There's still a lot of communities that are fully supported by extractive industry right now in Montana, and so that's not something that we can ignore. And so the full transition to tourism is not going to necessarily benefit them. And so I'm not trying to point towards extraction or tourism as a better capitalistic end outcome. What I'm looking at here is just raising the question and investigating through my lens what these structures look like and what our landscape looks like in response to all of that. I think a good artist asks questions in a similar way that a journalist does. I'm looking for the viewer to be able to form their opinion and get to their own conclusions about how they experience the Intermountain West landscape without me having to force my opinions on them. My opinions are prevalent here in that this is my interpretation of what I see and how I experience the landscape. But there's no right or wrong way. This is also a sonic as well as a visual installation. The sonic elements are looking to explore our communication as well as some of the sounds that are associated with extractive industry, and looking at that line between where music and art are is, I think, similar to looking at the line between our uses of our landscape. All of these things have these fuzzy boundaries that we like to define, and I like to pose questions at them. So what I have set up here is commercial sound equipment for the most part, consumer grade, mostly commercial sound equipment. And this sound equipment, what it is doing is creating a feedback loop from the resonant sound of the gallery. And so there are 4 microphones situated in these 3 sculptures as well as on this microphone stand right here. And they're picking up resonant vibrations from the gallery and then translating that into a stereo crossover, which then goes to 2 pirate radio stations. So these 2 low power radio stations are taking the low frequencies and the high frequencies and transmitting them on 101.5 FM and 105.5 FM. Both of which are frequencies I've worked with in the past with Missoula Community Radio. So there's another personal layer to why I chose those numbers. But those frequencies are being pushed to receivers in each of the sculptures, and then the sculptures repeat those sounds through the speakers, which then once again come back into the microphones and back into the board, creating a loop. That feedback loop will rise and fall depending on the amount of noise level in the space. And that rise and fall narrative arc is something I view as a sonic ecosystem. So it's creating this natural rise and fall in a similar way that we experience life. You know, it'll come up to a vast crescendo and then slowly fall off. And so that narrative arc is created by this feedback loop running through this board without effects. Everything is analog and everything is simply the resonant frequencies within this space. In terms of pieces that speak more directly towards extraction, we're standing in front of one. The piece here is Black Hole Sun, And this piece is based on head frames, so structures that would have supported mining carts that would have been lowered down into the earth. Very prevalent in places like Butte, Montana. And they're interpreted here through these grid structures. And I see the grid pattern as something recurring in my work because it also references our electrical grid. And also these straight square grids are less efficient than a triangular grid. And the triangles are something, and geodesic forms are something that play into the psychology behind some of the other works in here. But this one in particular is looking to support this 55 speaker array. And this array is translating sounds of the space through an FM receiver and custom built amplifier, which are in these piles of wires over here at the base, which are weighting the head frame towers to help keep this thing in position. It's also being supported by a vintage antique block and tackle, and that also has connotations to beyond extractive industry, as well just farming and agriculture. And there are a lot of nods to agriculture and our use of landscape through that means as well in here. Pieces that also more directly speak to extraction, these works over here are the pipeline series. This pipeline series, obviously is inspired by its name, and the truck bed coating on the muslin wrapped cardboard tubes here kind of nod towards that oil slick petroleum usage. And obviously the piles of coal are a fairly direct reference to that extractive nature, as well as the, again, wooden structures here, which are burnt wood, referencing both the grid as well as these head frame mining structures that we see throughout our landscape still. These pieces are acoustic sound cannons, and so the length of the tube is tuned to the actual driver inside of that tube, and that driver has something known as a free air resonance where it is most efficient, a decibel level where it is most efficient. And so all of these are tuned to that driver so that they have a very efficient sound quality, and so efficient and so low, in fact, that many of the subwoofers produce an infrasonic level of sound. So I'm hopeful that that will also be an accessibility factor for those that are hearing impaired. Infrasonic is below our hearing level, but it's something that you can feel physically. So this is the branch series of work inspired by a separate series called logs, which were more figural scale. So based on the scale, I called these branches. So they are like branches, an offshoot of that log piece. They're situated on 3D printed iron geodesic domes. And the geodesic dome, as well as the triangle, is something that I'm pulling from Buckminster Fuller. And the Buckminster Fuller reference is looking at his views on social structures and how they relate to the most efficient natural structures, in this case, domes and triangles. The domes are then supporting these welded steel structures, which are studded with, again, 3D printed iron. The 3D prints on these are tuned to fail intentionally to produce these organic looking results. And so I find that there's another layer in there where you're commanding a robot to fail in unexpected ways. And so the unexpected failure of the robot kind of produces this weathered look. Then the rest has been chemical patina to bring out that sense of age. The glass dome on the very top also is an acoustic element in that it contains the sound within these volumes because there's a speaker mounted in each of these pieces. And that dome is actually also a reference to Lost in Space and the domed helmet of the robot there. So I'm trying to draw from different layers and eras of popular culture, as well as my experience directly being in this landscape, to pull it all together and create some sort of narrative here. It's great to be able to share it finally, and that I've been trying to keep it fairly quiet, what I've been working on for the past 2 years, at least just keeping it in the studio. And it's certainly something different to see work in the blank box of the gallery, but also to see it in this large of a blank box. That's not something that you can commonly do or easily set up and replicate to be able to test. So that is a factor of these sonic ecosystems that I find extremely interesting, and it also lends itself to the title Endemic, and that each sonic ecosystem that is set up in each different space sounds completely different. And so the resonant frequencies of this gallery are different than the resonant frequency of another space I would have installed this work. And so you can't really know what it will sound like until it's all installed. And so there is a bit of a reveal moment even for me at the end of the work as to what exactly it will sound like in this room. That those little things are things that you can't predict or are difficult at least to test without being in the space and having each of these pieces interrupt that sound and interrupt those physical waves. Because a lot of this really is about the physical wave and trying to use the physical sound wave as a sculptural tool for manipulation and to add different layers to it, add interpretation.